These 3 pumpkins my husband managed to grow were so special. They're from his new garden. He manually pollinated them with Marvin Gaye music, and they grew. And there's this sweet variety of pumpkins, and they were probably between 5 and 8 pounds. So really cute, great color of orange. So he brings them into the house, and then he goes, "Okay, what are you going to make for me?" So that's when I started stressing. Hola y bienvenidos. Welcome to Molé Mama, Cooking with Love. You're about to join us for our weekly adventure where we chat about food, my favorite topic on the planet. And lots of weeks we have guests and other times we don't. So today it's just going to be me. But I have so much to talk to you about one of my favorite things on the planet, pumpkins. So it's October, it's time for, people are getting ready for Halloween and Dia de los Muertos, and there's lots of pumpkins and pumpkin patches and people decorating and all kinds of good things. And of course, every time I see a pumpkin, I see a pumpkin pie, I see pumpkin bread, I see all kinds of amazing recipes. So for this week's episode, I'm going to share some really, I think, amazing pumpkin recipes, as well as some pumpkin adventures. So tune in, join us. I think you're going to get really hungry listening to this episode. I'm not going to be surprised at all if you're going to be running out to get something made out of pumpkin following this, or trying one of these yummy recipes that I'm going to share with you this week. So first of all, we recently moved to Southern California and finally have some major space for a very wonderful garden. And my hubby has in the last few years become somewhat of an urban farmer. He's trying to grow food for us organically, non-GMO, and do the healthy thing. And this year, without me requesting it, he decided to grow us pumpkins. He also, like me, is a huge fan of pumpkins. And our backyard is terraced. So we think of a hillside that's terraced, and it's got 3 different levels. And the top level is where his garden is. So he put pumpkins in one of the corners of the garden. And he was all excited about all of his pumpkins. And the first thing that happened was his pumpkins were not really growing. So I grew up on a farm, but we didn't grow pumpkins. And this was a long time ago when we didn't have an issue with bees. And so I had no idea what was going wrong. But basically what was happening is that his pumpkins, you'd see a little pumpkin, it'd be maybe, 4 inches in diameter. And he'd be all excited and he'd go, "Oh, I've got another pumpkin growing." And then it would be aborted and it would die. So my husband started doing research, because that's who he is, and immediately found out that the female pumpkin has to be pollinated in order for it to actually take and for it to grow. So it actually has a little pumpkin first, so you might be deceived that you've got actually something happening. And then if it's not pollinated in the right amount of time, it dies. So my husband went into this whole process to start manually pollinating his pumpkins. Now, my husband is a very funny man. He put on Marvin Gaye music, I'm not kidding, in my backyard. He was going out with a Q-tip showing me pictures of the male flower versus the female flower. And he was actually taking a Q-tip, going to the male pumpkin flower and pulling off some of the stuff and then putting it into the female flower so that it would be pollinated and grow. So he would come in. It was like a daily thing. He was checking on his pumpkins, and some of them he didn't get the timing right, so he still lost them. And thankfully, he was able to grow 3 pumpkins. So he got 3 pumpkins out of this crop, and they are his babies. And he would come in and I'd hear the story of how he pollinated it, and I'd see the Q-tip, and sometimes he'd have some pumpkin stuff left over on his pockets from his pollination attempts. So anyway, I wanted to tell you this story because these 3 pumpkins my husband managed to grow were so, so special. They're from his new garden. He manually pollinated them with Marvin Gaye music, and they grew. And there's the sweet variety of pumpkins, and they were probably between 5 and 8 pounds. So really cute, great color of orange. So he brings them into the house, and then he goes, "Okay, what are you going to make for me?" So that's when I started stressing. And this was probably about 6 weeks ago, these pumpkins came into this house. And I've been thinking about this, and I've been looking at them. And first of all, I am so not a baker. I have a lot of friends that are amazing bakers, but that's not me. I'm a cook. So I'm like, oh no, I have to make something with pumpkins now that he's got them out. Uh-oh. So literally I stressed about it for 6 weeks. I did a lot of research and different recipes, and this last week was pumpkin week. So I'm going to walk you through all the things that I made, but I'll just give you a brief overview. I made pumpkin bread, which I would say is probably the best pumpkin bread recipe I've ever had in my life, and I'll tell you all about that in a minute. It's not my recipe. I also made pumpkin curry, which was amazing, also inspired by another amazing chef. And then I made empanadas. I made pumpkin empanadas, chorizo, and pumpkin empanadas, as well as these sausage mushroom empanadas. So I had a whole week of pumpkin cooking, prepping, and it was really fun. And I'm hoping that I'm going to share with you and you'll be inspired to maybe try some of these. So, first of all, I had also, in addition to not being a baker, I had never used raw pumpkins to cook with. Not something I've done. I've always just, if I'm going to do pumpkin dish, make a pumpkin pie, that's like the extent of what I've done, or pumpkin muffins. I would just buy a can. That's what my mom had done and done. So then I had to research, how do you actually prep a pumpkin? And oh boy, there's a lots of ideas and information out there when I went looking for that. And a lot of the recipes were talking about how hard it was. And I was talking to one of my neighbors, and she was telling me how hard it was. And I'm like, okay, I don't like hard. There's got to be an easier way. So this is what I did. And I'm sure somebody's written about it. I just didn't find it in my research. So lots of people talk about roasting them. It's very common. So I took our pumpkin and I cut it in half. And then when you open up the pumpkin, it's full of seeds and kind of this thready, veiny stuff. So I cleaned all that out. And then I put olive oil on the inside where the seeds were. I flipped it over and I put olive oil all over that too. I didn't put anything else because I knew that my pumpkin was going to be used for both sweet and savory recipes. So that's all I wanted to do. I didn't add salt. I didn't do anything. Some people add salt. They add sugar. They do all kinds of things. That's all I did, was just pure olive oil. And then I used parchment paper because I'm lazy and I hate cleaning up messes. So I put parchment paper down on my cookie sheet, and I put them face down. So that side that I pulled the seeds out, I put them face down onto the cookie sheet, and I threw them in the oven, or didn't throw them. I put them in the oven at 350 for 45 minutes and roasted them. And then I pulled them out of the oven and I let them set for probably about 30 minutes. And I was like, oh, everybody talked about flipping them over, getting a spoon, scooping them out. I'm like, oh, that doesn't look like fun. And I grew up peeling potatoes. My dad ate potatoes every day of his life. That was my job when I was growing up. One of my jobs in the kitchen with my mother was peeling potatoes. And I was like, I'm going to peel this pumpkin. And I let it set for like a half an hour. And what I noticed was that the skin started separating from basically the pumpkin itself, the pumpkin meat. I don't know what you call it. And I was like, ooh, I could just peel that off. So I actually started picking at it with my finger, and sure enough, it started peeling off. And in the places that it didn't peel off, I just took a butter knife and took it all off and done and done. It was so easy. So I was like, yay, easy. The next thing you have to do after to prepare it, and most people talk about you have to smash it up or puree it. So I just put it into my food processor and pureed it. And then it has excess water. So the pumpkin that you actually buy that is canned is has already been concentrated. So thankfully, I have some really big strainers because of making mole. And so I put the pumpkin in the big strainers and let it drain out. And it was really interesting. I left it for probably 30 minutes, just how much water came out of it and the consistency from beginning to end on how dense it became. So then my pumpkin was finally ready to actually cook with. So this process, I was doing other things throughout the day. So I did it kind of slowly throughout the day. So it wasn't that big of a deal. I was doing other things as well and working around at some other projects I was working on. So not a big deal. So that was day one. And then day two is when I started cooking. And the first thing I knew my husband wanted was this pumpkin bread. My lovely friend, Alicia Delicias, if you're not following her, please do on Instagram. She is like a cookie goddess. She makes the most beautiful cookies or cookie art. And she had made us probably about 2 months ago, she had made us some pumpkin bread. And it was the best pumpkin bread I've ever had in my life. So I had asked her for that recipe and she shared, which I was so grateful that she shared this recipe. And what's really unique about this pumpkin bread recipe is that it takes orange juice and it's super moist and walnuts. And not a lot of walnuts and they're not, finely chopped. So like every other bite you get like a nice decent sized walnut in that pumpkin and oh my gosh, so delicious. My husband and I can't even tell you that pumpkin bread. I think um, I made a double batch and I made two really large loaves and two small loaves and it was cleared out of our house in a couple of days, gone. It was just so delicious. And I'd have to say that using fresh pumpkin, I think it really added to the flavor of the pumpkin bread. It was really flavorful. And her recipe also called for a lot of different spices. It was cinnamon and cloves, um, as well as nutmeg. And I think that really added to the flavor as well. So super delicious. So if you're looking for a pumpkin bread recipe and you like that spice, I would look for recipes that have those items. And I would also look for one with orange juice because it is a trick. And the bread was so incredibly moist and flavorful. So the next day, I decided because I was like, okay, I got through that baking thing. The bread wasn't, I don't think, as good as my friend Alicia's because I don't, like I said, have those baking magic hands. But for me, it was good and my hubby loved it. So I was happy that I'd honored his pumpkins. So the next thing that I made was I love pumpkin curry. It's one of my favorite curries. I love Indian food. And a few months ago, I had the amazing the Pepper Cook. She is in India. Again, another person you should be following on Instagram. And her blog is amazing. She has so many fantastic recipes. And I had made her mango prawn curry probably 6 weeks ago. We loved it. It's the best mango curry I've ever had in my life, hands down. It's her recipe from her website, from her blog. And I was looking for pumpkin curry recipes, and I really couldn't find one that spoke to me. One of the reasons why I loved the Pepper Cook's curry recipe, her mango curry recipe, so much is it's non-dairy. I have some weird issue with yogurt where I can't my stomach doesn't tolerate it, and it doesn't matter if it's non-dairy. I've tried almond yogurt, I just can't do it. So I was looking for a non-dairy curry, pumpkin curry. So finally, after kind of looking at a whole bunch of recipes and not finding any that I loved or that looked interesting to me, I went back to the pepper cooks recipe, and I basically used her mango curry recipe, but instead of using mangoes, I used pumpkin. So if you find her recipe, it is the prawn mango curry, and I'll make sure that we put the link for you in my show notes. I would suggest that what I did was I doubled that recipe, or did one and a half recipes, sorry, and I used 3 cups of pumpkin in the recipe, and one and a half times everything else she mentions. I also did not have a lot of the spices. I didn't the first time either that she referred to. So all I did was I used powdered turmeric, powdered curry, and powdered California chili, which is just a blend of chilies. It's kind of spicy. And then followed her recipe with the coconut milk, and it was divine. I also added to it, I added some sweet potatoes that I boiled separately and then put into the curry, as well as some carrots that I also had boiled separately and put into the curry, and a few prawns. And it was just, my husband and I, again, love this. It was, in my mind, one of the best pumpkin recipes or pumpkin curries I've ever had. But it goes back to the foundation of the pepper cook. So you need to, if you're going to try this recipe, like I said, go find her recipe. It's amazing. And I do think that using the fresh pumpkin, again, really helped this recipe. And the only thing that I didn't use that she recommends for the mango curry is I did not use the ginger. And I think next time I make it, sometimes when I make recipes, I'll pull out a small little piece and I'll put a spice in it to see if it's going to work or not. And I didn't do that at all this time with the ginger, because I didn't want it to be similar to pumpkin pie. I didn't want it to, in any way, shape, or form. I've had ginger and pumpkin pie and bread before, and I just didn't want it to remind us of that. I want it to really be a savory dish. So, like I said, I'm next time probably going to try the curry, or try the ginger in just a tiny bit, and then I might be convinced. And you might try it too. And if you do, let me know. But that was the only thing of the spices that she listed for her mango curry that I did not include. So if you want to try that. And then the last day of pumpkin cooking and honoring my husband's pumpkins was all about empanadas. I love empanadas. My husband loves empanadas. I've never made them before, but I knew about Muy Bueno Cooking, another guest that's been on a couple of my shows, and I knew that she had this cookbook and these amazing pumpkin empanadas. And so I actually bought her cookbook and I made her empanadas. Her recipe is fantastic. So I wanted to do sweet and savory. So I did the sweet pumpkin recipes, followed her recipe exactly in her book. It was really easy. She talks about her method of how she prepares her fresh pumpkin, which is a little bit different than what I explained, but you can use mine or hers or whoever's, it doesn't matter. But I used that recipe and it was so delicious. Now, I said at the beginning of the show, I'm not a baker, and I was really nervous because I had to make my own crust for these empanadas. Now, I thought long and hard about this. I almost bought the pre-made pie dough. I'm going to be honest. I was looking at it at the store. I actually had a box in my hand. And I was like, no, Diana, you could do this. You could, because crust and breads and, just they scare me. So I followed her recipe to make the dough for the empanadas, because if you haven't had an empanada, I forgot to mention this, it is basically like a turnover. So if you've had an apple turnover, that's what it's like. It's also very similar to a samosa, an Indian samosa. So it's got crust and then it's got yumminess in the middle. So it's very, very good. And so the crust for me, I wasn't concerned about the filling. Not at all. Not scared because, again, that's cooking. But for me, it was more about that crust. Oh no. But a very magical thing happened when I started making her crust. It was flour and shortening and water and some other things. And I used to make flour tortillas with my mom almost every day when I was a young child and a young woman. And I didn't realize until I had my hands in the flour, mixing everything together, that I had not put my hands into a bowl of flour like that since she died. And so it was so incredibly magical for me to look down at my hands in the flour. And it was like my hands are very similar to my mother's. And it was like seeing my mother's hands in that flour. And like instinctively, I knew how to mix it and I remembered it. And all this memories came back of exactly what you do when you get your hands in flour. And it was so fun. And it was just a great connection and really made me think about all the times that I had cooked with my mother and making tortillas and making cookies and all the things that we would make together. So it was wonderful. And her recipe, you make it, you put it in the refrigerator, you pull it out, and it worked. It was like magic. It all worked and came together. And when I had them all done, and they were out of the oven, and we had some neighbors over, and my husband took a bite, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, honey, this is like having pumpkin pie, and like just a mini pumpkin pie," and he just absolutely loved it. And our neighbors loved them, so highly recommend making these. They're a little bit labor intensive, I'll be honest, but so worth the trouble and so delicious. So I wanted to, in addition to making these sweet ones, I wanted to make savory ones as well. So my prima, my cousin Giselle Martin, who has a lovely podcast called Elevate, also taught me how to do chorizo and pumpkin. So with that, because you don't actually puree the pumpkin or any of the other things we talked about earlier, you actually cube the pumpkin. So it's very much like a potato, and then you put it in chorizo. Chorizo is a spicy Mexican sausage that you can get at any Mexican grocery store. And there's a lot of supermarkets now that carry chorizo. And all you do is you fry and prepare your chorizo, and then you add these cubes of pumpkin. And earlier in the show, when I was talking about how I prepared it and I baked it, I did it exactly the same way as far as baking in the oven, but I had saved one pumpkin to do the savory with. And for that one, I just baked it for 30 minutes. I still was able to peel off the skin, use a butter knife in the places it didn't come off very, very easily. And I cubed it like in potato pieces, like, probably half-inch cubes, and threw it in the chorizo, cooked it really well, added some spices, and then I used that and manchega cheese. I love manchega cheese. If you haven't tried it, manchega cheese is very similar to Parmesan. It's a dried cheese. It's of Spanish descent. It's very, very mild, but it works really well with a lot of my recipes with spicy food. It really complements it just very, very well. And they're actually now selling it at Costco, so it's very easy to find, and I think you can get it in almost any grocery store. So, so that was my combination for my savory empanadas, at least one of them. And the other thing I did was, I had a ton of cremini mushrooms in my refrigerator, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna make all these empanadas. I'm gonna do something with those too. So I actually, when I made this recipe from Muy Bueno Cooking, I tripled it. So I was making empanadas for 4 hours. And the sausage ones, I think, were my favorite, in addition to the sweet pumpkin ones. But it was chicken sausage, cremini mushrooms, a little bit of butter, onions, garlic, and a little bit of manchega cheese when I was putting them all together. And those were outstanding, just delicious. So I've given you a whole bunch of recipe ideas for this fall and for fresh pumpkins. So I hope that you will try one of them. If you try all of them, that's amazing. And of course, as always, if you try any of them and you have any questions at all, please reach out. You can always reach me on Instagram through direct messenger as well as through Facebook. And I would be happy to help you or give you some tips. And like I said, these were not my recipes. I used others and they worked really, really well. So with that, thank you for listening to this episode of Molé Mama Cooking with Love. Please visit our YouTube channel for more amazing recipes where you can learn to make delicious guacamole, chimichangas, molcajetes de queso y chorizo fundido, crunchy tacos, enchiladas, flour tortillas, and so much more. And if you like what you listened to today, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. We love to hear from you. Remember to add the most important ingredient to every recipe you make, your love. And as my mama always said to me as we said our goodbyes, que Dios te bendiga. May God bless you. Thank you for tuning in to Molé Mama Cooking with Love.